My true story from Tennessee after the wedding. My daughter secretly put laundry detergent into my coffee machine every day to poison me and take my property. Luckily, I installed a hidden camera and handed the footage to the police. She won't even taste the difference. She's drank bitterness her whole life. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the quiet kitchen like a blade. She leaned in close to my son, her husband, smirking as she lowered her voice even more. One sip closer to silence. That's all she's good for now. She paused, her eyes glinting with cruelty. If she drops dead on the porch, we can call it natural causes. They did not know I heard them. I was standing just around the corner, my hands still damp with dishwater from washing yesterday's plates. But then I froze, the sponge slipping from my fingers, and I let them have their moment. I soaked in every word. Bitterness, silence, natural causes. They thought I was too old to understand, but I understood perfectly. It had been 2 weeks since I moved in with them. Widowhood had closed a door on the life I had with Harold, but the world thought it opened another in my son's house. I brought with me the furniture from our home, the memories we wove together, and yes, I brought the papers for the life insurance, the savings, and the will that was unsigned because I had not yet found the right moment to share it. I believed I would be welcomed, cherished even, for all that I gave. But hindsight is clearer. They framed the first morning perfectly. A woman with a bright smile handed me a steaming mug, precise and fragrant. "Here you go, Mom," she said with practiced sweetness. Cold coffee, I thought. But that could happen. Within hours I had cramps deep in my gut, my vision blurred. My hands shook when I reached for the faucet. I told myself it was my fault. Always that thought. Because my son hovered, concern in his eyes. But each sign intensified. A morning later, I barely made it to the sink. They brushed it off. "You are just tired. It's just age." The third time, I misplaced my reading glasses for an hour. That's when I started noticing the powder residue on the coffee filter, slimy white trails on the funnel each time she poured. I am no fool. But I had to be cautious. He was my son. I didn't want to believe he would help, or at least ignore her actions. When I looked at him, I pretended not to recall the late-night whispers I heard the evening before. "We just need to wait another week. She still hasn't touched the property papers." Sometimes the truth hides beneath the cloak of family duty. So I decided to observe, to measure, to prepare. But I did not mention a word. The mornings after that were weighted with dread. My hands trembled before the kettle. I drank anyway, because resistance would only pique their suspicions. Each sip became a gamble, each swallow a risk. I double-checked the coffee canister lid, but she always ensured it was locked tight. I watched her from the corner of the kitchen as she filled the filter. I noticed how she paused, stirring something into the water before locking the lid. I didn't stop her. Not yet. I went to the doctor after the third alarming episode. She pressed stethoscopes against my heart, asked me to write my name, to hold still, to look at her clearly. She said it was essential tremor, age, nothing to worry about. But when I reminded her of my perfect health record, that Harold and I walked 2 miles daily until the day he passed, the doctor shifted. I was in my 70s, ripe for decline, she said. That was enough for them. Yet I suspected otherwise. Because the tremor only came after breakfast. Because my vision cleared by noon. Because there was acid residue under my tongue that tasted like bleach. Because bitterness, yes, but chemical bitterness. I could taste it even as they told me to rest, to eat oranges, to stop worrying. I decided to line the filter holder with layers of paper, to collect particles. I waited for the culprits to think they had succeeded, that my blindness would justify their words. And then the day came. I tasted nothing out of place in the drink itself, but the residue from residual spots had collected. I brought it home myself, rinsed the funnel, wiped the filter, kept the evidence in an envelope inside my purse. My son looked at me the next morning as I stood quietly with the mug. He said, "Mom, maybe you should go stay with your friend Linda for a while. Rest." His eyes contained compassion, but not enough to stop her. It was the first time he mentioned Linda's invitation. I nodded, and he kissed my forehead. I didn't mention the twitching blind spot he ignored the moment I nearly dropped the cup in his presence. I swallowed. Again. I opened the kitchen cabinet and rearranged the mugs. The blue mug Harold bought me on our 40th anniversary would stay hidden. I would have to drink from the plain white set, noticeable but not alarming. Later, if I ever need to stop the poison, I'll know whose cup has what. But for now, I must act like nothing is wrong. That afternoon, I found a discreet camera online, grainy footage, inconspicuous. I wired it behind the coffee nook where no one would look. I tucked the power cable into the wall behind the toaster. Later that evening, when they were all asleep, I placed a USB stick next to the DVR slot and tucked it inside the drawer. My heart pounded not with fear but with resolve. My world was under threat, but this was my home. I would protect it. The next morning, I sat at the island. My book lay open but unread. When she twisted the lid of the coffee canister, paused, and then slowly poured into the filter, I did not look away. I pretended to be lost in thought. I watched her pour water, pause, reach for something behind her, an unknown powder, and stir it into the machine. My breath caught, tears pooled behind my vision. I bowed my head, a single nod to her routine, then stood and left the kitchen before my hands shook again. I will wait. I will survive. I will record. I will act. Some wounds we conceal until we have the proof. My proof is that camera, still recording as I type this now. Each morning it captures her betrayal more clearly. And one day soon she will stumble not upon my weakness, but upon my strength. They think the older I am, the quieter I will be. They believe I will die soon, and everything will be theirs. But they forget I've endured forceful storms, outlived diseases, and built a life with gentle hands and a sharp mind. They forget that bitterness sharpened my instincts. And one sip closer to silence, my voice will rise louder than the echo of her betrayal. Because I am not done living, and I refuse to vanish quietly. I woke with my chest tight and my head throbbing. The house was quiet but inescapable. My bones ached, as though I had aged by decades overnight. I told myself it was just exhaustion, or a weak heart. But beneath it all, a slow anger simmered. This wasn't just age. I made my way to the doctor's office mid-morning, trying to ignore my stomach twisting in knots. The receptionist smiled and handed me a clipboard. I'd written my name 30 times in the last 2 weeks. First as a test of strength, then as a declaration that I was still present. Dr. Keller appeared, sharp, clean, too young to understand grief. He checked my vitals, asked some routine questions, then peered at me. "Everything looks fine for your age," he said. "Your heart is steady. Your blood pressure is a little elevated, but that often comes from stress or age. Simple things. Try to rest more, eat more fiber." I nodded, but in my chest words bristled. I told him about the tremor, about my vision blurring. He watched me reach for the chart with my right hand, trembling. After an awkward silence, he asked, "Have you considered it might just be age catching up?" It was an answer I'd heard too many times. Wrinkles, bone density, forgetfulness. They blamed everything on age. But this was different. This was calculated. Stepping out of the clinic, I slipped into the car, closed my eyes, and let the world spin. I felt foolish. I'd come with evidence, my mornings, the taste residue. But he dismissed it all. He was complicit, whether he knew it or not. Back home, I tried to focus on the day. I switched between dusting and sipping water, avoiding the kitchen but not the ache in my skull. I remembered the nights I found small, unexplained splashes of powder under the coffee maker tray, the smell of soap lingering in the air. I wasn't paranoid. Not yet. Just determined. Later that afternoon, I went downstairs to my sewing room, a refuge of memories and hush. The soft hum of the sewing machine felt safe. And then, that breath, like footsteps near the kitchen. I froze. I listened. My daughter-in-law's voice, low, whispering. And another voice, Dr. Keller's. "This is working," the doctor said. His tone was too calm, full of practiced confidence. "Soon she'll be out of the way and everything falls into place." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. They don't hide well when they think I'm sleeping. "Doc, how long?" the voice asked quietly. "Another week. Maybe 2. We need her signing that new directive." I swallowed. The directive, my unsigned will, my rights, placed the property under joint control. That was when it hit me. It wasn't only the coffee, they were planning a takeover. I sat in the sewing room chair, hands trembling, eyes wet. Not tears, rage, fear mixed with clarity. I realized then the betrayal I thought I felt at my son's silence was eclipsed by who he trusted. Her, and the man who swore to protect me. I waited until I heard footsteps retreating upstairs, and the hush returned. Then I opened the drawer beneath my sewing table where I kept 2 small notebooks. One was my journal, the other had all the medical records we ever compiled. I nodded to myself. Enough waiting. That evening, I took out the notebook and wrote, "Today I heard the last whispers. I own this house. I own my life. They plot to remove me, body and rights. I will not disappear." I turned off the lights and stood in the darkened hallway. The house was quiet and still, but I heard everything. The next morning, I woke early before anyone else. I dressed and made my way into the kitchen. My stomach pitched. I paused at the sink and looked into the empty mug. I reached down into my pocket and touched the cold metal of a small hidden camera, bought online that morning. It was tiny, no bigger than a button. The camera would live behind the coffee nook. I found a spot right behind the water filter unit where it could see the entire area. I installed it quickly, glancing only once over my shoulder. At first it felt like betrayal, placing a camera in my own home. But then I remembered their betrayal. My hands shook, not with fear, but determination. I taped the wire into the cabinet behind the toaster and tucked everything neatly. No one would see it. Later, when they gathered for dinner, the house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary. My daughter-in-law smiled at me across the table. My son looked distracted. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, listening to the clink of forks, the hum of conversation about weekend plans. Everything felt surreal. After dinner, I excused myself and returned to my sewing room. I opened the second notebook. I wrote, "Camera installed. First test tomorrow morning. Keep calm. Do not reveal." In my head, I rehearsed the routine. Wake early, let her pour, wait for the telltale move, then fetch the file. I would record every moment of that slow betrayal. That night, I laid awake for a long time. I remembered Harold's steady voice. I reminded myself of who I was, a woman who built hospitals with her husband, who managed finances, who cared for children and neighbors. I would not be forgotten here. I would not become invisible. When I finally slept, I dreamt of coffee pots melting into puddles of bleach. I woke with tears in my eyes but strength in my chest. Daybreak came. I sat at the island, book open but unread. I watched the filter drip, her shadow moving in careful steps. I held the coffee mug tight, my heart pounding. She clicked the lid closed, smiled at my back and turned away. I waited, a heartbeat, then reached under the counter, slipped out the USB I'd wired to the camera. My world shifted that moment. I wasn't a passive victim anymore. I was a woman with evidence, with purpose. I climbed the stairs, paper in hand, and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked older but not beaten. I touched the lines around my eyes. They were proof of survival. I whispered to myself, 1 week, 1 clip, justice. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The morning light crept into the kitchen just before 6, soft and cold. I slipped out of my bedroom and made my way downstairs as quietly as I could, careful not to disturb the house. The camera I installed was in place, hidden behind the coffee nook. Now I filled the coffee canister with fresh beans, silently hoping this time would confirm everything I feared. I found my favorite white mug in the top cabinet. I liked that mug because it reminded me of simpler days. Violet's baby shower, my husband's birthday, quiet Sunday mornings before the world woke up. In that soft light, I filled it with water from the carafe and set it next to the kitchen island. Then I stepped back, heart steadying. Minutes later, I heard the cabinet open, the familiar shuffle of slippers. My daughter-in-law appeared, as always, first. She didn't smile at me. She glanced at the mug, flicked her hair out of her face, turned to the filter assembly, and knelt to refill with fresh grounds and water. I watched from the end of the hallway. She paused when she heard the machine turn on. I imagined her thinking everything was normal. Then, very quietly, I heard her unscrew a small jug from behind the sink. She worked fast, poured a thick, dull liquid into the filter funnel. She tapped the jug, filling the coffee machine. Moments passed. The coffee machine whirred. She sniffed the steam rising, her face slackening. She turned and walked away as if nothing happened. I stayed hidden until the drip ceased. Then I stepped forward, lifted the coffee filter holder, and found the white powder. Water mixed with softening agent and detergent residue. I pressed the filter bag gently, capturing some residue, then snapped a photo where the powder stuck to the folds of the bag and the filter funnel. I gathered it carefully in my coat pocket. The day ahead stretched full of decisions, but first, I did what I always did. I wrote this moment in my journal. June 12. Proof. She does it. I have photos. I will take this to Linda today, my friend retired pharmacist. If it tests positive, I can show pattern. She thinks I don't know. But now she knows I know. I will not stop. I tucked the filter and photos into an envelope and walked to my car, driving slowly to Linda's home. Roses bloomed along her walkway, and when she opened the door, I felt the weight lift a bit. She ushered me inside and we sat at her kitchen table, ringed by teacups and herb jars. I handed her the envelope. "Try it," I whispered. She nodded and unpacked the filter bag and photo. She laughed, softly, nervous laughter, and stepped into her lab in the basement. 30 minutes later, she reappeared, holding a sealed test tube. "Did you spill laundry detergent on your hands?" she asked gently. I shook my head. She lifted the tube. Hundreds of parts per million of sodium lauryl sulfate, along with traces of borate. It's definitely from detergent, enough to irritate the stomach lining, enough to harm the kidneys over time. I exhaled. I almost cried, but the anger crystallized it into power. "Thank you, Linda." She squeezed my hand. "Are you going to the police?" "Soon," I said. "First, I need records. I'm starting a separate account today. No group access, no shared cards." It was the next phrase I spoke that felt decisive. "And I need copies of medical records, medication logs, the works. I want every doctor's note from the time I moved in. If I can show a pattern, it's stronger. I want undeniable proof that this isn't just age or stress. It's sustained poisoning." Linda nodded again. "I'll help however I can." That afternoon, I made an appointment with my personal banker. I had cash, a portion of savings, and I needed it off their radar. I signed papers for a private account under my name, with no joint access. The account was modest, enough to cover living all expenses independently if I needed to leave. The woman who opened the account asked, "Moving soon?" And I said simply, keeping my options open. She didn't ask more. Back at home, I returned to my kitchen. My daughter-in-law was making breakfast. She looked at me curtly. "Running errands?" she asked. "Just bank stuff. Don't wait up for lunch," I said quietly. She nodded, but something flickered in her eyes. Frustration, fear, or both. That afternoon, I collected the camera footage. I spent hours labeling each clip with date and timestamps: June 9, 10, 11, June 12. Each clip showed the same pattern, her pouring detergent powder into the coffee machine. I waited until my son went to work. Then I slipped the USB into my bag and called my lawyer, Mrs. Patterson. She picked up immediately. "Be in the office at 10 tomorrow," she said. My heart raced. Finally, evidence, legal steps, not revenge, but justice. That evening I gathered all documents in a folder: photos of residue, Linda's lab report, copies of my bank account change, filtered footage timestamps, and a letter to Mrs. Patterson. I left the folder in my room as I prepared a light soup for dinner. My daughter-in-law sat across the table, inspecting me through narrowed eyes. I ate slowly, tasting every spoonful. My son watched me, worry in his posture. She said nothing, but I felt the tension coil. She knew something had changed. After dinner, I excused myself for an early rest and went to bed. I lay awake, mind racing but confident. I thought of the next steps: meeting Patterson, filing the complaint, perhaps even preparing a family disclosure. My son might hate me, but the truth was a flame worth letting burn. I fell asleep, with clarity pulsing through me. I was no longer waiting for a question or an apology. I was standing on the proof of their betrayal. The bitterness in my gut was not age or shame. It was righteous. It was survival. When I woke the next day, I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes felt sharper than they had in weeks. Hunger, not for food, but for truth. I smoothed the wrinkles on my blouse and stared long enough to see a woman beyond her years, a woman who refused to be erased, because a sip might kill, but vigilance saves. And the proof was in my hand. The next morning, I arrived at my lawyer's office, the folder of evidence in hand. Mercedes Patterson led me into her study, a cozy room lined with books on elder law and justice. She sat behind her antique desk and opened my folder carefully. Photos, lab report, bank records, coffee footage, all neatly labeled. After a long pause, she looked up at me. "Your evidence is strong," she said quietly, "but if we're going to prosecute, we need their motive and history. Patterns repeat." I nodded. "What do we know so far?" She turned to her laptop and began typing. A few minutes passed before she looked up again. "Your daughter-in-law, Emily Green, she was a licensed nurse at Riverside Care Home until 2009. She was fired after 3 families accused her of administering excessive sedatives to their elderly. Her license was revoked, and the facility settled quietly." My throat tightened. She never mentioned a thing. "That's not all," Ms. Patterson continued. "Your doctor, Dr. Keller, has been reprimanded twice for misprescribing. I have reports here, handwritten notes prescribing narcotics in doses unfit for elderly patients. Some families complained, but he avoided lawsuits by transferring patients." I felt bile rise. "He's the one in the clip whispering with her?" "Exactly," Ms. Patterson said. "I believe they met at Riverside during the investigation. I remembered meeting him at their wedding, his respectful tone, that quiet bedside manner, too quiet now. But there was more." Ms. Patterson scrolled through emails on her screen. "We accessed Emily's old email account before your gift and found several sent messages to your account. One is dated 2 days ago. She enlarged the contents, subjects important update, actions required. Dear Mother, please review the attached directive to amend estate documents. It maintains property rights but includes additional signatures and clarifying language, beneficial for co-management. Thank you, your loving daughter-in-law." My hands trembled as I watched the forged email address, my name at our domain. They had redirected finance through that message, I shivered. "They attached a PDF that modifies your will," Ms. Patterson explained. "Signed with your name, but the signature font is mismatched. It's digital forgery. Together they poison me and adjust the documents," I said softly, my voice steady. "They planned to lock me out legally once I grew too weak to protest." "They underestimated your awareness," Ms. Patterson said, giving me a look. "Now, we document motive, method, and collusion. That's criminal conspiracy, elder abuse, attempted murder, legal forgery, not to mention insurance fraud if she named herself primary beneficiary." My heart pounded. The gravity of their plan was larger than I'd imagined. Over the next days, Ms. Patterson pulled personnel files, incident reports, and records of Emily's firing. She subpoenaed Dr. Keller's prescription history and patient complaints. We compiled thorough documentation of motive, money, control, property access. Each exam revealed more. Emily had purchased a small life insurance plan listing herself as beneficiary, while Dr. Keller co-signed a large policy on my life. She once joked in a record, "We're covered for anything, ills or spills." At home, I stared at the forged email, wondering how many other manipulations I didn't yet know. The betrayal stung deeper, knowing they used my name to deceive the bank, the lawyer, potentially even you, the judge. That evening, I met with my accountant to untangle the forged directive. Filing amendments to the will meant proving its illegitimacy. I created a new folder labeled Solid Proof for Bank Legal Court Media. When I returned home, Emily and Dr. Keller were having dinner in the living room. Light laughter, though strained. I walked past cautiously, but Dr. Keller smiled warmly. My eyes fixed on his face, and I knew no warmth there. He saw guilt. Weeks passed. The investigation deepened, grand jury subpoenaed records. My son grew distant, jealous. He asked if he should step in. I told him to let the system work, it would speak louder than anger. Late at night as I lay in bed, I reflected on how carefully they built their house of deception. Not just poison. They had planned to erase me from the family lineage, the property, and the world. They believed they were smart. They believed I was old and fading. But they underestimated the power of memory and silence. I held their plot in my pocket, in my folder, taped and bound. The camera continued to roll each morning, capturing more pieces. Discussions about bank appointments, a whispered conversation about having to finalize everything when she's gone. The footage was quiet, but potent. When I closed my eyes at night, I heard my own voice from that recording. One sip closer to silence, spoken by her. A phrase I reclaimed. Every night, I rehearsed 2 words. Justice comes. Soon, everything would fall into place, just as they'd planned for me to fade. But they'll be surprised where the silence leads. The folder weighed more in my hands than the years I'd carried. It wasn't the weight of paper, but the gravity of truth. I stood at the kitchen table, reviewing each page. Photos of coffee residue, lab reports, divorce of joint accounts, the forged will email, witness statements from Linda, career records of Emily and Dr. Keller, and the tiny USB of camera footage. This wasn't just proof, it was a declaration. I would no longer be erased. That morning I drafted a letter. It was short, cold with precision, but offered no apology. I folded it carefully and slid a copy into 6 separate envelopes, one addressed to the local police department, another to the district attorney's office, a third to my lawyer, and 3 more, labeled, "To our wedding guests." Dear guest, while you toasted to love upstairs, I was drinking poison downstairs. I wired the folders to each recipient. By noon, the police had the folder. By afternoon, the DA's office had thumb drives labeled Emergency Evidence, Elder Abuse/Attempted Homicide. My lawyer confirmed receipt of her envelope at 4 p.m., and by evening, all 6 wedding guests, my son's closest friends, colleagues, family, received the discreetly delivered packet. I watched as a ripple unfolded. Messages began pouring in, shocked texts, calls asking if I was okay, emails expressing horror and sympathy. One guest wrote, "I can't believe what she's done. I'm so glad she's safe." Another, "This is bigger than I thought. I'm with you, Mary." I tasted victory in those words. Not revenge, not yet, but validation. I was not alone. My son called at 8 that evening. His voice trembled. "Mom, what are you doing?" I explained. "I'm protecting myself. I'm protecting the truth." He sighed. "But Emily didn't do it to hurt you." "I don't understand." His voice cracked. "She nearly killed me," I said softly. "I have proof," he scoffed. "You're being paranoid. The doctor said it was nothing. Age, stress, your wife dropped detergent in my coffee. The camera caught it. I gave the evidence to police. They're investigating." "Mom, stop this!" "Son," I interrupted. "This isn't paranoia, it's poisoning. Do you want me dead? Do you?" Silence. He didn't answer. "Please," I said quietly. "Let them investigate." The next morning, I saw Emily. She held my gaze with forced politeness. "Mom," she said, "are you sure?" "Yes," I replied evenly. She shook her head. "You're ruining everything." Her eyes flicked to the coffee machine, and I held her stare. I didn't break. That afternoon, Detective Ramirez came to the house. He spoke quietly, respectfully. He reviewed each piece of evidence at the kitchen table, switched on the TV in the corner to show me a live briefing on elder abuse cases in the region. I offered tea. He declined. He left, promising a prompt investigation. The weight of anticipation settled on me. That evening, the phone rang again. Money, messages, concern. The world was paying attention. But inside the house, my son's demeanor had shifted. He avoided eye contact, spoke less, sat sideways at dinner. Emily tried to keep normal. She even made coffee herself. I offered only water. I went to bed early while he sat at the kitchen island under the halogen light, paper in hand, battle shaken across his face. Tomorrow would bring more, but tonight justice was awake. I stood outside the courthouse early that morning, sunlight filtering through the columns of stone, casting shadowed lines across my face. I wore the dress, a pale blue gown I'd donned 50 years ago for my wedding to Harold. Its delicate lace and satin buttons reminded me of a life filled with love, not betrayal. I was no longer that 40-year-old bride, but today I would renew a vow, to protect my dignity and truth. My lawyer, Mrs. Patterson, joined me, her presence steady and reassuring. Together we walked into the courtroom, where murmured conversations hushed as I entered. Word had spread this wasn't just any family dispute. Cameras lined the hallway. Reporters whispered about the elderly woman who dared to bring her daughter-in-law to trial for attempted murder. I took a seat beside Mrs. Patterson at the prosecution table. Across from us sat Emily, her face ashen, her makeup applied too thick like armor. Dr. Keller stood next to her, tall and pale, nervously adjusting his tie. Their lawyer looked across the room, scanning for sympathy that wasn't there. When the judge entered, robes swishing, the room settled. Opening statement followed. The burden of proof lay with us. But I felt something ominous behind me, the collective attention. My son sat in the gallery, eyes downcast. He hadn't made eye contact yet. Patterson started. She laid out the timeline. Breakfasts 2 weeks ago, the sick episodes, the camera, the lab results. Then she said, "But what we have here is more than poisoning. It is conspiracy, elder abuse, attempted murder with premeditation." Then came time for the clip. I watched as the video played on the large monitor. It showed Emily picking up the jug, unscrewing the lid, pouring detergent into the filter. The images froze. Silence hung like fog. Emily's lips parted. She tried to speak, but couldn't. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting glasses. No one moved. Then the lawyer for the defense rose, challenging chain of custody, camera permissions. But his words felt hollow. Too little. Too late. Next, the prosecution shifted to the insurance angle. Dr. Keller had signed as co-beneficiary on life insurance policies for me, drafted days after the wedding. That flicker of greed underscored everything. Mrs. Patterson leaned toward me. Everything they did was calculated. Then came the moment I spoke. The courtroom lights dimmed. I rose slowly, weaving my words with clarity. "Your Honor, I lost my husband 6 months ago. I came here looking for refuge in my own family. Instead, I found a slow poisoning. Every morning I drank from the same machine, believing it to be coffee. I didn't realize then that each sip edged me closer to death. She knew I wouldn't taste the detergent. She counted on my age, my quiet. She thought I'd vanish without a trace. They called it natural causes. Someone said, if she drops dead on the porch, no one will ask. I'm standing here because I refuse to be that old woman who disappears." My voice cracked over the word, old. The gallery held its breath. My son's face had gone pale, and my daughter-in-law stared, her mask slipping. I continued, "They tried to kill me slowly, but I remember it fast." Silence fractured. I looked at Emily, once a daughter figure, then at Dr. Keller, the man who pretended to care. I wanted them to understand. I am more than memory loss. I am the result of every sacrifice. Every lesson. I am the outcome of 15 decades of living, and I demand to continue living. The judge called for a recess. I sat back down, a tremor of adrenaline in my veins, yet a sense of triumph softened the panic. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm. Cameras in the hallway glimpsed my dress, a bridal blue shining across their lenses. When court resumed, the DA called Detective Ramirez to testify. He confirmed details. Emily had purchased detergent in suspicious quantities. Dr. Keller had filed suspicious insurance paperwork after the wedding. Texts between them spoke of urgency. Signalize it before she notices. Emails were signed with my name. By midday, the jury had seen enough. Verdict read, guilty on all counts. Emily faced 15 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, elder abuse, and insurance fraud. Dr. Keller, 20 years, no parole, no leniency. As the judge banged the gavel, I closed my eyes. The echoes rang like a bell. I lived. When court emptied, I saw my son lingering. His eyes met mine, filled with shock and something deeper, regret. He whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." I nodded, but words failed me. My life had been upended, but today I reclaimed it. I exited the courthouse, wearing the wedding dress not as a memory, but as armor. Behind me, cameras snapped, audience stirred, and the sound of my voice spoke across town. They tried to kill me slowly. I remember fast. This courthouse day would mark not just a victory, but a lesson. Silence is not surrender. I remained standing. Rain fell steadily the morning after the verdict, painting the streets of Nashville in shades of gray. I sat in the modest tea shop I opened just days ago, sipping chamomile from a delicate porcelain cup. It was called Still Standing, a name chosen with quiet intention. The walls were lined with soft tea blends and a few black and white photos of my life. Harold and me on our 50th anniversary, me in that same pale blue dress, smiling broadly. The bell over the door jingled, and I looked up expecting a customer. Instead, I saw him, my son David, standing there, soaked, rain dripping from his collar. His face was a map of exhaustion and regret. He clutched something in his hand, papers fluttering in the wind. I set down my cup with a soft clink. He stepped forward, water seeping into his shoes. He looked at me with eyes I barely recognized, haunted, sorrowful. He didn't say anything. He just reached into his coat and placed a thick envelope on the counter. "Read it," he said, voice low. I watched him for a moment before opening the envelope. Inside was a stack of papers, the finalized divorce petition, his signature detaching himself. Under it, a single line, "I have done the unthinkable. I'm not worthy of you or the name you gave me." He sank to his knees in the empty shop, head bowed, tears trailing down his cheeks. Rain pounded the windows like a drumbeat of fate. Nothing moved but David and the storms outside. He said, "Mom, I didn't want to hear his apologies. I'd heard his silence before. I'd felt his protection of Emily when I most needed him. I'd tasted the betrayal long before the coffee was laced." His voice cracked. "I didn't know. I didn't see it. I love you, Mom. I never wanted her to hurt you." He tilted his head upward, his tears falling into the puddles on the floor. "I'm sorry." A gust of wind rattled the door. I looked at the cup in front of me, gone cold, and I realized he was no longer my little boy. He was an adult, responsible for his own actions, just as I was now fully responsible for myself. I stood up slowly. My bones protested, but my resolve held steady. Without a word, I turned my back on him. I walked across the shop and opened the heavy wooden door. The rain hit me with force, but I didn't flinch. I could feel every drop, a baptism of sorts. Behind me, I heard his sobs break the silence. I wiped my eyes against the cold air and looked out toward the storm-blurred street. I whispered to him, "Stay if you can." But I didn't look back. Some doors close not because you want them to, but because they must. Some relationships end not with violence, but with silence. I walked away from him into the storm, not out of pride, but because peace requires distance. Back inside the shop, I closed the door behind me. The bell chimed, solemn, final. I leaned against the frame and watched David's silhouette through the rain-streaked glass. He didn't move. He just stood, holding the envelope, drenched and broken. He stayed until I disappeared from view, the interior lights swimming in the reflection. And then he fell to his knees again, weeping into the envelope on the wet pavement. Inside, that stack of divorce papers reflected the weight of choices, his and mine. Later that evening, the storm subsided. I sat by the window, as tea shop owner now, not widow, not victim, and listened to the hush of night. I felt no triumph. Instead, I felt closure. The end of an era, the beginning of another. 4 months passed. The shop grew. Locals discovered the peace of tea and talk. Survivors of abuse found monthly gatherings. One room offered free counseling. Every afternoon someone would tap on the bell and ask, "Are you Mary? I came because of you." My son visited once, not expecting a warm reunion, but a news segment caught him in the shop window. He pressed his face against the glass, eyes red. I was speaking to a young woman who'd suffered nursing neglect. They held each other's hands, tears glistening. David stayed quiet. I stepped over to the window. He gasped. I motioned for him to enter. He paused, about to potentially cross a boundary intact. I met him halfway, in the doorway, under the glow of dim lights. The tea house smelled of honey and chamomile. He looked at me, ashamed. "May I come in?" I nodded just once. He stepped inside like a man stepping into a new chapter, unsure of the past but willing to face the future. He helped around the shop without offering to stay. He wiped tables, delivered tea, and was quiet. I offered him a seat. "Sip?" I asked gently. He nodded and took a cup. Steam curled around him like a soft promise. He exhaled long and said, "I wanted to say I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, conjuring the memory of his tears in the rain. He continued, "I lost you. I lost myself, but I'm here." The only sound was the slow drip of a teapot in the back. I placed a hand on his, warm and firm. "Your silence hurt, but your return matters." He pressed my hand back. "Can you ever forgive me?" I nodded and said softly, "I forgave the man I loved. Now I'm learning to trust the man you're becoming." He exhaled with relief. I poured him another cup of tea. The clock ticked. The heart healed. That night, I wrote in my journal, "David came home." It wasn't a dramatic scene, no tears, no grand speech, just 2 cups of tea. My son returned where he belonged. I closed the shop at dusk and locked the door, but tonight I left the window open, because some wounds heal in silence and forgiveness whispers on the wind. Rain clears and sunlight stretches kindly over Tennessee's rolling hills as the auction begins outside Nashville. A peculiar buzz hums through the crowd assembled in front of a modest white tent. Hidden beneath a glass display on a small wooden pedestal sits the very thing that nearly cost me everything: my old coffee machine. It's been cleaned, polished, and affixed with a small plaque reading, "Piece of Justice." At the microphone stands the auctioneer, crisp in blazer and charm. Cameras from local news crews line the perimeter. This isn't just any sale, it's a statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says with gravitas, "this is the original machine from the case of Mary James, otherwise known as Coffee for the Crone. It now has a new purpose. Your bid helps open the One More Sip Center for elder survivors. First bid, $500. A hand shoots up. A reporter prompts someone to sway others. They nod. The bids climb. $1,000, 0 cents. $5,000, 0 cents. $10,000, 0 cents. The crowd leans forward. $15,000, someone calls. The energy ripples. Finally, at $32,000, 0 cents, gavel hits wood. It isn't about the numbers, it's about transformation. A vessel for poison becomes a vessel for purpose. I smile from the front row as the new owner, a local philanthropist named Harriet Spencer, raises her paddle with tears in her eyes. Cameras flash. 1 month later, I stand in the doorway of a renovated brick building a few miles away, now the One More Sip Center for elder survivors. A bronze plaque is embedded high on the facade. "If they underestimate you, let them. They'll hear you last." The plaque was my final touch. I remember who I was. Quiet, unseen. Now I want every survivor who walks through these doors to feel heard, valued, and safe. Inside, the scent of chamomile and rosemary greets you. Volunteer helpers guide new arrivals into warmly lit rooms. One room, painted a soft mint green, is designated for counseling. Another, pale yellow, is used for workshops and guest speakers. Under soft lighting, comfortable chairs gather around a low table holding fresh scones and tea. Each space carries a memory of survival and support. A local news crew draws close. The reporter introduces me on camera. Reporter: "Mary, congratulations. It's a beautiful space today. How does it feel to turn a tool of harm into one of healing?" I meet her gaze steadily. I'm no longer hiding. I clear my throat, then say, "Me. They fed me poison. I fed the world your confession." Cameras capture the line. Within hours, that phrase is splashed across the evening news. By next morning, it shows up as captions on social media, quoted in news tickers, shared in Facebook feeds. Even strangers send me messages. That line hit like a revolution. It is viral, a quiet power, a deliberate statement. A few weeks later, a young woman arrives with a shy smile. She introduces herself. "I'm Carol L. I'm a social work student. I saw your center's announcement. May I volunteer?" Her voice is warm and earnest. I nod, and together we walk through the rooms as she asks questions, sets up folders for new clients, prepares tea for an informal workshop later that afternoon on speaking when no one listens. Watching her, I think of my younger self, new to the city, learning that kindness doesn't always protect you. I ask her, "Why do you want to stay long-term?" She meets my eyes without hesitation. "Because elders deserve more than help, they deserve a voice. And because you showed me what it means to stand up." I nod, touched. That's more than any donation. That afternoon, survivors start drifting in. Women and men older than me, each carrying stories folded in their eyes. A woman whose daughter threatened nursing home placement to access her bank accounts. A retired teacher whose granddaughter took her keys so she wouldn't mess things up. They arrive shy, hesitant, yet their hope glimmers in every step. I stand at the front, teapot in hand, ready to welcome them. I pour chamomile into delicate cups. One by one they come forward. We form a circle. And they begin. I was told I was just confused until I fought back. He said I'd lose everything if I fought for my rights. But I came today for the first time to say thank you for creating this. I close my eyes for a moment. The taste of tea, the warmth of voices, the gentle tears. It's more than I ever dreamed after my ordeal. The place hums with life. Over the next few months, the center thrives. Workshops, legal clinics, art therapy, community talks, it becomes a lifeline. My son visits shoulders low, but speaks now. He sits, sipping mint tea, watching survivors share stories. I don't introduce him. I don't offer a seat. He finds one on his own. One morning I overhear him talking softly with Corel by the tea bar. Son, I let her control everything, even my loyalty. I was wrong. Corel, it takes courage to be quiet, and courage to return. I can see both in you now. I smile from across the room. A small moment of reconciliation. Beginning, not an end. But the heart of this story belongs to our unveiling event on grand opening day. We cut a blue ribbon. Guests include the mayor, reporters, survivors' families, donors. I step to the podium, my shawl draped over that same pale blue dress, my bridal gown pinned under a modern cardigan. Some gasp in recognition. I speak softly but firmly. We opened this place because age should not equal silence. Because a poison machine once nearly took my life, and instead, this community chose to make it a symbol of hope. This center belongs to every person whose voice was silenced. Let this house be a reminder. Even the most bitter sip yesterday can bloom into tomorrow's strength. Applause fills the room. A tear forms at my temple as survivors nod in solidarity. Later that evening, I sit at a table by a window. The city lights twinkle beneath the darkening sky. Caroli approaches, holding a small wooden plaque she made, still standing. She sets it beside my teacup. I touch it, eyes swelling. She says softly, "You were never a crone. You are our quiet justice." I reach across the table. "And you? I can't imagine this place without you." She smiles deeply, absorbing every syllable. As night approaches, I sit in the empty shop and reflect. From that first sip of betrayal to now, I've transformed fear into action. Once invisible, I've become a beacon of gentle power. The One More Sip Center stands as testimony. Survival isn't just about living. It's about reclaiming voice and space. I write in my journal, "They thought I would fade. I thought I would disappear. But in the shadows, I found resolve. Now this shop, these walls, they speak louder than poisoning ever could. This is where silence voices rise. This is where I finally stood, not for myself only, but for all who follow." And so, dear listener, this is where it ends and begins again. If you've ever felt underestimated, invisible, or quiet in your own story, remember one thing: if they underestimate you, let them. They'll hear you last. Thank you for staying with me. If this story moved you, if you know someone who needs a sanctuary or a survivor's voice, please like, subscribe, and share Grandma True Stories. Let's lift up every voice that's ever been silenced, because one more sip of justice can change a life. Subscribe now, and never let your silence be your end.